Every year the same question pops up. Why December 25th for Christmas? The popular theory, the one we all hear, points to pagan holidays. But what if I told you the real story is completely different and honestly way more fascinating? Let's dig into the evidence. So yeah, here's the central mystery. The date is so fixed, so traditional, we almost never stop to ask, where did it even come from? It's not in the Bible, so how in the world did the early Christians land on this one specific day? Okay, so this is the theory you've definitely heard. The idea is that the early church, in kind of a clever marketing move, just plopped Christmas right on top of a big Roman festival to make converting people easier. And look, it sounds plausible, right? But the actual historical clues, they point somewhere else entirely. To find the real origin, we have to start in a place you would never, ever expect. It doesn't begin with shepherds or a manger. Nope. It begins with the end of Jesus' life, not the beginning. And that right there, that's the crucial first clue in solving this whole puzzle. Think about this. As early as the 2nd century, long before Christianity was even legal, let alone a state religion, Christian thinkers were already trying to figure this out. This was an internal discussion they were having. They weren't trying to compete with pagan festivals. They were driven by their own theological curiosity to create a meaningful timeline of Christ's life. So let's meet the key players in our investigation. We're looking at a period between roughly 150 and 240 AD. These writers, guys like Clement, Tertullian, Julius Africanus, and Hippolytus, they're the ones who are piecing all of this together. And this is the fundamental shift in thinking we have to make. Their goal wasn't to take over another holiday. It was calculation. They needed a solid, theologically significant date to build their entire chronology around. So, what was that anchor? And here it is. The thinker Tertullian, writing around the year 200, made the case that the most reliable date for Jesus' crucifixion was March 25th. This corresponded to the 14th of Nisan in the Hebrew calendar. This date, the date of his death, became the bedrock for everything else. The timeline starts with the cross, not the cradle. Wild, right? Okay, so we have our anchor date, March 25th. But how do you get from a death to a birth? Well, it all comes down to a simple but really profound piece of ancient theological logic. See, at the heart of their whole calculation was this tradition of, well, you could call it cosmic symmetry. It was believed that a perfect life, like a prophet's, had to span an exact number of years, down to the very day. And because of that, the date of their conception had to be the exact same day as the date of their death. The historian Julius Africanus is the one who really put the pieces together. It's a simple 3-step process. 1. The crucifixion was on March 25th. 2. Therefore, according to that tradition, the conception must also have been on March 25th. 3. From there, the math is easy. You just add 9 months for a normal pregnancy. And there it is. March 25th plus 9 months lands you squarely on December 25th. It's not some random date they picked out of a hat, and it's not a date chosen to co-opt a festival. It's the result of a theological equation rooted entirely within early Christian thought. Now, a calculation is one thing, right? But is there any early evidence that Christians were actually using this date? The answer is a huge, definitive yes, and it comes from a source that completely changes the whole debate. Here it is, what you might call the smoking gun. Around the year 244, a writer named Hippolytus of Rome, in a commentary he's writing on the book of Daniel, just casually mentions December 25th as the date of Jesus' birth. He isn't arguing for it, he states it like it's already a known thing. So, why is this so decisive? Well, it's all about the timing. This mention by Hippolytus is decades before the big imperial festival of Sol Invictus was even a thing. It's way before the Emperor Constantine, so you can't blame it on political influence. It proves pretty conclusively that December 25th was already an established date inside Christianity, long before the pagan replacement theory could have even been possible. All right, now for one of the most powerful tools a historian has, the evidence of what isn't there. Sometimes what people don't say is just as revealing as what they do. When you go back and read all these early Christian writers, Clement, Tertullian, Hippolytus, Africanus, you find something absolutely remarkable. In all their debates and all their number crunching about the date of Jesus' birth, they never, not once, mention Saturnalia. They never mention Sol Invictus. There is zero talk of co-opting or replacing a pagan holiday. I mean, think about it. If the main reason for choosing December 25th was to muscle in on a pagan festival, You'd expect them to say so. They'd justify it, or maybe even celebrate it as a victory. But there's just nothing. That silence is deafening, and it's seriously compelling evidence that the whole pagan replacement idea just wasn't their motivation. So let's bring all the evidence together. Let's lay out the final verdict here. The origin of Christmas on December 25th wasn't an external decision. It was entirely internal. The entire logical flow is the self-contained theological formula. You start with the crucifixion on March 25th. That date is then used for the conception. Add 9 months, and you land on the birth, December 25th. It's a closed loop. So here's our main takeaway. The date for celebrating Christ's birth was actually derived directly from the date of his death. And that's a pretty powerful idea, isn't it? That the shadow of the cross falls all the way back over the cradle, connecting the very beginning and the very end of his life in one beautiful, symmetrical story. And that really leaves us with this final thought. Celebrating on December 25th isn't something the Bible commands, but it is a kind of biblical conclusion. It's a date that was figured out by early Christians using their own theological reasoning, a confession of faith worked out through some pretty fascinating historical detective work. And that matters, because it reveals a story not of cultural borrowing, but of profound internal reflection. So let's just start with the big one, the question that gets thrown around all the time. Did the founders of Adventism basically cancel Christmas? Did they label it some kind of pagan holiday that true believers should just avoid altogether? It's a really powerful idea for sure. But is it true? To figure that out, we've got to separate a very common, very modern myth from what was actually happening in history. And believe me, this is where it gets super interesting. So on one side, you have this modern idea that's pretty widespread. Christmas is a pagan holiday, and it has to be rejected. Full stop. But then you go and look at the actual writings of the pioneers, and that teaching, it's just not there. I mean, it's a huge gap between the myth and the documented reality. So you have to ask, if this idea didn't come from the pioneers, where did it come from? Well, history shows it's actually a much later development. It seems to have bubbled up from a mix of things, some old anti-Catholic arguments, a general suspicion of religious symbols that was part of the wider holiness movement, and of course, what you might call modern internet-level research, which, let's be honest, often connects dots that aren't really there. Over time, all these different threads just kind of wove together into the strong anti-Christmas stance some people hold today. And this brings us to a really crucial point. If the pioneers weren't worried about pagan roots, what was their concern? Well, it had absolutely nothing to do with a date on the calendar. See, the pioneers were deeply, deeply wary of empty ritualism, formalism, just going through the motions without any real heart in it. But they were incredibly open to things that could be used as teaching tools or symbolic acts to remember Christ. For them, it was always about the attitude of the heart, not just the outward practice itself. And for the decisive kind of smoking gun evidence, we really have to turn to the writings of one of the church's most influential founders, Ellen G. White. And what she wrote, well, it isn't ambiguous or hidden away in some obscure letter. Nope, it's incredibly clear. Just take this statement from way back in 1884. She acknowledges the celebration and then gives direct counsel. Now, notice her words very carefully. If it is celebrated at all, this isn't a command to stop. It's guidance on how to do it right, how to make sure it actually honors Christ. So this quote is so obviously pastoral guidance, right? It's not a ban. She never calls Christmas pagan. She never says it should be abolished. Her entire focus, the whole point, is on the spirit behind the celebration. That's the key. But hang on, it gets even more explicit than that. Check out this quote, which honestly is often unknown or just totally overlooked. She says God would be well pleased if Christmas trees were put in the churches and used for a charitable purpose. I mean, for a lot of people, this is a total game changer for how they see this whole issue. Let's just break that down for a second. We're talking about large, decorated trees right inside the church sanctuary, and their purpose? To hang offerings for mission work and acts of benevolence. This is not reluctant tolerance. No way. This is an active, positive endorsement of using a cultural symbol for a much, much higher purpose. So all of this points to a core principle. Her approach was never about outright rejection of the holiday. It was about a total reorientation of its focus. For her, it was never about the symbol itself, but about the direction that symbol was pointing. You see, Ellen White saw what was happening. She saw Christmas becoming more and more about commercialism and self-indulgence. Her counsel was this powerful call to shift the focus away from that and back to charity, back to mission, and back to Christ as the ultimate gift. And this quote, it just sums it up perfectly. She's basically saying, hey, let's take all this energy, all the resources, the whole spirit of giving that's already in the culture, and let's point it back to God. It's a redirection, not a rejection. Okay, so was this all just a nice idea, just a theory, or did they actually put this into practice? Well, let's take a look at what was really happening on the ground in those early Adventist churches. The historical record is crystal clear on this. Adventist churches did, in fact, use Christmas trees. And they used them exactly as she suggested, to collect offerings for missions and to help the poor. This wasn't something done in secret either. These were public, church-led activities that intentionally included the children. So what's the big picture principle at work here? And maybe more importantly, why does any of this matter for us today? The principle is something you could call cultural redemption. It's this idea that instead of withdrawing from the culture, the pioneers took a cultural element, in this case Christmas, and they infused it with a completely new mission-focused meaning. So what this means is that within Adventism, Christmas is not commanded, it's not a matter of salvation, and it's certainly not obligatory. But it can be a really powerful teaching tool and a way to make a public statement of our faith, which, as it turns out, is exactly how the pioneers treated it. So after looking at all this evidence, all these writings, what is the single definitive takeaway that we can confidently state? Here it is. Our pioneers did not reject Christmas as pagan. Ellen White not only acknowledged it, but she explicitly approved using its symbols, like the Christmas tree, for good. For them, the problem was never, ever the date or the symbol. It was always 100% about the spirit behind it. And, that really leaves us with a final question to think about for ourselves. In a world that's just drowning in commercialism and empty tradition, how can we follow their example? How do we make sure that in our own lives, we're separating the symbol from the spirit, making sure our celebrations truly point back to Christ? That's something worth thinking about.